What happened when your gut instinct told you this guy was bad news? My ex-wife and I had one of those divorces that confused people. Whenever someone found out we were divorced but still got along, they acted like we were hiding something. The truth was much simpler. We had fallen out of love. There had been no cheating. No screaming matches, no dramatic betrayal. Just two people who eventually realized they worked better as co-parents than as husband and wife. By the time the paperwork was finalized, we had already spent months figuring out how to make life as stable as possible for our daughter, Sophia. She was 4 years old at the time, smart, funny, stubborn in ways that reminded me of her mother. The kind of kid who could spend 20 minutes arguing about why vegetables shouldn't count as food. Neither of us wanted our divorce to damage her childhood, so we made rules, lots of them. Rules about schedules, rules about holidays, rules about school events, rules about introducing new romantic partners. That last one was especially important. We agreed that neither of us would introduce Sophia to someone we were dating unless the relationship had lasted at least 6 months. At the time it seemed reasonable. Kids get attached easily. The last thing we wanted was a revolving door of boyfriends and girlfriends entering and leaving her life. 6 months felt like enough time to know whether a relationship was serious. For almost a year after the divorce, neither of us even came close to introducing anyone. We were both focused on rebuilding our lives. Then one afternoon my ex called me. It wasn't a serious conversation. She simply mentioned she had started seeing someone. His name was Gordon. I remember sitting in my car outside Sophia's daycare while she talked. She sounded happy, genuinely happy, and despite what most people assume about divorced couples, that didn't bother me. In fact, I was relieved. I wanted her to be happy. Life would be easier for everyone if both of us moved on successfully. I asked a few questions. What did he do for work? How old was he? How did they meet? Normal stuff. Nothing immediately raised any alarms. According to her, Gordon worked in IT management for a large company. He was educated, successful, funny, and apparently treated her extremely well. When she finished talking, I wished her luck and thought that would be the end of it. At least until the 6-month mark, then fate decided to intervene. About 2 months later I was meeting a client for dinner at a restaurant downtown. The meeting ended earlier than expected. As I was leaving, I glanced across the dining room. That's when I saw my ex. She was sitting at a corner table. Across from her sat a man I immediately assumed was Gordon. The moment she noticed me, she smiled and waved. For half a second I considered pretending I hadn't seen her. Not because I disliked her, I just didn't enjoy awkward social encounters. Unfortunately, she was already walking toward me. A few seconds later we were standing face to face. She looked genuinely excited. Perfect timing, she said. I want you to meet someone. Then she introduced me. Gordon, this is my ex-husband. The second I looked into his eyes, something felt wrong. Not uncomfortable, not awkward, wrong. Even now, years later, I struggled to explain it. Nothing obvious happened. He didn't threaten me, he didn't insult anyone. He didn't act aggressively, but the moment I shook his hand, every instinct I had started screaming. The closest comparison I can make is the feeling animals get before a storm. That strange sensation that something dangerous is approaching even though the sky still looks clear. His smile was perfect, too perfect. His handshake was firm, too firm. Everything about him felt rehearsed. Like he'd spent years studying how normal people behaved and was now performing an imitation. We exchanged basic pleasantries. He complimented my watch, complimented my job, complimented my parenting, and somehow every compliment made me dislike him more. The conversation lasted, maybe 5 minutes. But during those 5 minutes, I noticed something strange. Every topic eventually circled back to him. If I mentioned work, he'd explain why he was successful. If my ex mentioned travel, he'd tell a story about somewhere he'd been. If I talked about Sophia, he'd somehow redirect the discussion toward how good he was with children. It wasn't natural, it felt calculated. Then he brought up Sophia directly. That was when my discomfort became something stronger. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. You know, I'm really excited to meet her eventually. I nodded politely. He continued. Honestly, 6 months seems like a long wait. There it was, the first red flag. Not because he wanted to meet her, that part was normal. The problem was how quickly he pushed against the boundary. He barely knew my ex. They'd been dating only a couple of months, yet he was already questioning a rule specifically designed to protect my daughter. My ex quickly changed the subject. The conversation ended shortly afterward. But as I walked back to my car, that awful feeling remained. It sat in my stomach like a stone. For the next several days I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was being territorial, maybe I was subconsciously jealous. Maybe I simply didn't like the idea of another man being around my daughter. But none of those explanations fit. After all, this wasn't the first boyfriend my ex had dated since our divorce. She'd briefly dated another guy several months earlier. I hadn't cared, not even a little. This felt different. A week later I met my ex for a custody exchange. After Sophia ran inside, I pulled my ex aside. "I don't like Gordon," she laughed, not mockingly. More like she thought I was joking. "I'm serious." That got her attention. She asked why. The problem was I didn't have an answer. I couldn't point to anything concrete. No evidence, no specific incident, just instinct. And instinct sounds ridiculous when you're trying to explain it. "I don't know," I admitted. "Something feels off." She looked thoughtful. Then she reassured me that she wasn't planning to introduce Sophia before the 6 months anyway. I appreciated that, but it didn't help. The feeling remained. Months passed, every custody exchange became stressful. Every time I dropped Sophia off at her mother's house, I wondered if Gordon would be there. Every time my phone rang unexpectedly, I worried something had happened. My friends thought I was losing my mind. One of them actually laughed when I described my concerns. "So your evidence is that he gives you weird vibes?" When he said it out loud, it sounded ridiculous. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had created an entire villain inside my head based on nothing. Yet no matter how hard I try, I couldn't ignore the feeling. Then one afternoon something unexpected happened. Sophia came home from her mother's house carrying a stuffed dinosaur she'd won at an arcade. She spent 20 minutes explaining the dinosaur's complex backstory before casually mentioning that her mother was sad. I asked why. She shrugged. "Because her boyfriend went away." My heart skipped. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Oh yeah," she nodded. "They broke up." I felt relief wash through me so quickly that it almost made me dizzy. But then another question immediately followed. "Did you ever meet him?" Sophia shook her head. "No." I asked again later just to be sure. Same answer. "No. Never, not once." For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. A few days later I met my ex for coffee. I assumed she was struggling with the breakup. Part of me even felt guilty for being relieved. When we sat down, I offered my condolences. Then I admitted something. "I know this sounds terrible, but I always had a bad feeling about him." Instead of looking annoyed, she stared into her coffee. For several seconds she didn't say anything. Then she sighed and told me the truth. A little boy had disappeared from a nearby town several weeks earlier. The case had dominated local news. Parents were terrified. Schools had increased security. Police were asking anyone with information to come forward. Everyone hoped the child would be found alive. Most people feared the worst. During the investigation, something unusual happened. A member of Gordon's IT department discovered disturbing images on a company computer during a routine review. At first they thought it was unrelated. Then someone noticed the child in the photos looked remarkably similar to the missing boy. Police were contacted immediately. A warrant was obtained, and officers raided Gordon's house. What they found horrified everyone involved. The missing child was alive, barely, locked inside a small closet. Starved, terrified, covered in injuries. According to investigators, he had been trapped there for days. Maybe longer. Nobody knew how close he had come to dying. The details became public weeks later, but even those reports left out many of the worst things officers found. Gordon was arrested on the spot. The investigation uncovered additional crimes, additional victims, additional evidence. The case exploded nationally. As my ex told me all of this, I felt physically sick, not because of Gordon. Because of how close he'd come to meeting Sophia. If their relationship had lasted a little longer ... If he'd hidden his crime slightly better ... If police had arrived a few months later ... My daughter could have known him, trusted him, spent time around him. The thought made my blood run cold. Then my ex told me something even more disturbing. After his arrest, Gordon called her from jail, not once, several times. He genuinely believed she would support him. According to her, he spent nearly 20 minutes insisting he had been framed. He claimed evidence had been planted. He blamed coworkers, blamed police, blamed everyone except himself. The most terrifying part wasn't what he said. It was how convincing he sounded. Even after everything, he still spoke with the same confidence I'd seen in that restaurant months earlier. The same fake charm, the same manufactured sincerity. Except now everyone could see what was hiding underneath. My ex immediately blocked every possible method of contact. She obtained a restraining order, changed passwords, installed security cameras. Eventually she sold a house entirely because she no longer felt safe living there. Halfway through telling the story, she started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears. The kind that come from realizing how close disaster came to your life. She kept apologizing for dating him, apologizing for not seeing it sooner, apologizing for putting Sophia at risk. I reached across the table and stopped her, because the truth was simple. She wasn't responsible, Gordon was. People like him survive because they're good at pretending. They study normal behavior, they learn exactly what others want to hear. They build trust carefully and methodically. That wasn't her fault. The scary part was that nobody had seen it. Not her, not his coworkers, not his friends, not his neighbors, nobody. At least not consciously. The only thing I had ever possessed was a feeling. A completely irrational feeling that I couldn't explain. For years afterward, that experience stayed with me. I never became one of those people who believes every gut instinct is magical. Instinct isn't evidence, it isn't proof. People can absolutely be wrong, but sometimes your brain notices details you can't consciously identify. Tiny inconsistencies, subtle behaviors. Things that don't quite fit, and somehow it assembles them into a warning before you understand why. To this day, I still remember shaking Gordon's hand in that restaurant. I remember his smile, his voice, the way he talked about my daughter. And I remember that cold feeling spreading through my chest. At the time I thought I was being irrational, paranoid, maybe even unfair. Years later, after everything that happened, I realized something. I wasn't reacting to something I knew, I was reacting to something I sensed. And for the first and only time in my life, that instinct may have helped keep my daughter safe.